Good evening. Tonight's workshop will focus on funding and program design. This workshop is focused on nonprofits and social enterprises. My name is Michael Randolph. Let's start with the legal and copyright notice that it's unauthorized to reproduce any of the materials that we're going to discuss tonight without our permission. The state of nonprofits between 2025 and 2026. 1 in 3 nonprofits lost government funding. There was 28,000 plus jobs cuts in 2025. This is when you compare to 2024, a 409,000 plus increase. 37% of nonprofits operated with a deficit, and this is a 10-year high. And to that, 42% of nonprofits lost their funding from government sources. 29% had to reduce their staff, and 86% reported inflation has impacted their operation. So what is the impact or the economic impact on philanthropy? Well, let's look at the numbers. In terms of workforce crisis, federal grants cancellation, stop work orders, and contract clawbacks drove 28,000 plus cuts in the nonprofit sector. That's a 409% increase compared to 2024. Government funding collapse. Government grants make up 42% of disruptive nonprofits revenue. Private philanthropies is 3 times too small to replace what has been lost. Donor erosion. Individual donors fell 1.3% over the year. Food insecurity jumped to 14.2% nationally. Demanding raising as resources strain. Who are we? Again, my name is Michael Randolph. I'm with the Center for Nonprofit and Community Development. What is our mission? Well, to empower organizations driving meaningful community change while fostering growth and realism. Vision. Well, our vision is to empower nonprofits to be the best that they can be. What are our core specializations? Well, let me say, we've been around for a minute, since 2011. And one of the pillars, and I'll talk about all the 4 pillars. One is the pillars, is community program development. We build programs from the ground up, grounded in community data, shaped by residential voice, and designed to win funding. That program development includes putting together logic models, theory of change, all the things that we're going to talk about when we get to program development. And program development is so important because if you don't have a winning grant, the likelihood of getting that grant is zero. The second pillar is neighborhood planning. We got organizations through inclusive revitalization, turning resident priorities into actionable, fundable community plans. The third pillar is social entrepreneurship. We help mission-driven organizations build earned income engines that reduce grant dependency and impact long-term solutions. And finally, best practices and building to capacity. We transform driven proven systems and scalable frameworks that that evaluate how nonprofits operate, report, and grow. So, what has our impact been in those since 2011 when we officially got started, although we did get started in 2009? Well, to date, we've been able to provide training like the one you received tonight to over 3,500 different nonprofits across 37 different states. In terms of nonprofits who came to us in order to get assistance to start that nonprofit and for us to file the appropriate paper, that number represents 400 plus around the nation. But more importantly, it's our national focus on transforming neighborhoods under our community initiative that focus on disenfranchised and marginalized community and focus on approaches to deal with housing, workforce, economic development, health, and all those different things that make a community strong again. So, workshop learning objective. By the end of this workshop, participants should be able to understand nonprofit legal foundation, including bylaws, articles of incorporation, identify and apply the 3 stages of a nonprofit development, design effective programs with clear intervention, build high-performing board, manage volunteers, and develop a strategic community partnership. You should also be able to navigate financial basics, including tax exemption, sustainable budget. You should be able to research, and write a compelling grant proposal. You should use AI as a tool to help you in your effort. And finally, and most importantly, though not in this particular order, you should be able to create a 5-year plan of action or strategic plan for your organization. So let's define what is a nonprofit. Well, the legal definition is that a state exempt entity specifically designed to advance the public good without distributing profits to the owners. They have core values. There's a financial model, and that model is that revenue is reinvested entirely into the nonprofit to maximize community impact and organizational sustainability. So, what are the 3 stages of a nonprofit? Well, the first stage is the emergence stage. This is when you establish your legal structure, define your mission, value, and you begin to launch your initial program. The second stage is the intermediate stage. This is when strengthening your HR system, formalizing internal policy, and improving program evaluation comes into place. And then finally, this is the advanced stage when you're scaling programs geographically, diversifying funding sources, and enhancing financial systems. So there is a new action in the nonprofit world, as you know, with all of the um, funding being reduced. Also, in addition to that, there is a new way forward in terms of what do especially government look for in nonprofits today. And it's called MERD, Excellency, and Intelligence. In a post-DEI policy environment, the rules of engagement has changed. The organization that thrive will be those who compete on a undeniable merit, deliver measurable excellency, and apply support intelligence, making it clear for their value, making a case for their values so clear that the policy cannot be ignored. So let's break it down. What do they mean by merit? That is, when contracts through measurable outcomes and documented track history. We're going to talk about this later on when we get deep into the grant class. And that's why this class is so important because it meets these standards. The second thing is E for excellency. That is it delivers result that set the standard. Funders will seek you out if you do this. And then finally, the I for intelligence, using AI, data, and technology as a competitive equalizer. Now, these are three of the foundation. But let's go real deep into this. And I'm staying on this for a minute because, like I said, this is a new standard for nonprofits, even before we start to talk about grants. So let's break down and practice what it is when we're talking about MEI. Um, and I'm not gonna say each category, each item in each category. I'm just gonna talk about one or two items. You can review this when you get it. Well, when it comes on the mark, they should build portfolio that speak louder than certification. When it comes to excellency, she create programs so effective that funders want to seek you out. You also want to build partnerships with institutions that validate quality. And then when it comes to intelligence, understand the legal landscape and operate inside a safe harbor. In addition to that, the language that you use in terms of going for grants, well, that's changed also. When we talk about legacy language like at-risk population, underserved, disadvantaged, deficit framing, now with the modern language, we have to use terms like historically excluded communities, documented ex- disparities, strength-based framing, resident voice center. So let's talk about the different types of grants. And it includes unrestricted grants. Unrestricted grants generally focus on general operating support with the maximum flexibility. The most valuable and various type of funding, unfortunately. Restricted grant, which is more likely, are strict specific project grants with measurable outcomes tied to the grantor's defined priorities, capital gains. These type of grants are funded specifically for facility renovation, major equipment, and infrastructure improvement. And then finally, you have matching grants, and this is becoming more and more and more the lay of the land. That is, funds are released only once the required matching dollars from other sources are secured. Okay, let's continue on. Now, let's talk about the funds themselves and who are they? And let's start with a grantor profile. That is grantor. These are the people that give the money. So starting with the individual, most major source of charitable giving nationwide. The one of the cons, because we're looking at pros and cons. One of the cons to this is it's difficult to cultivate for early stage operations. But your major source of funding is going to be individuals. For example, if you go to a store and you see something, a box that say Red Cross, and they ask for donation, that's individual source. So individual is a major source of funding. The next, foundation. Well, foundation as a pro gives larger awards with clear guidelines and cycles. The con is that it's highly competitive and access is often limited. That's why this class is so important as to how do you get to these foundations? What is it that was triggered their attention? And then you have corporations. Now, the pro for corporation is that it's a reoccurring grant and in-kind support possible. However, the con to this is that it rarely provides ongoing support indefinitely. And then, of course, you have government grants, and the later land has changed that. But they do provide very large awards for systemic community change. However, the amount of money that they provide has changed dramatically. We talked about that earlier when we talked about the crisis. Nevertheless, there's still grants out there, and those are large awards. The other thing about these government grants, when you look at the other types of grants, is that it's more complicated in reporting and compliance requirement. When you get a federal grant or a state grant or any government type of grant, the requirements is much more stricter than the other types of grant we talked about earlier. Okay, well, we talked about the different types of grantors. We talked about the different types of grants. And we talked a little bit about the crisis. Now let's talk about the funding. How do you get to the money? Where do you find the money? So here, let's talk a little bit about the core platforms that you can use. We're going to talk a little bit more later on in the presentation. But if you want to go for federal grants, you can search them out on grant.gov as well as sam.gov. Now, if you're going for foundation grants, you can go online to, it's called Candid. And these are two, these are two sites that you can go to, your federal as well as your foundation. I must say that they do charge you to use Candid, but they believe this. With that software, you can search over 25,000 different funders, plus 25,000 plus different funders that you wouldn't normally be able to find if you do a search generally. They even beat out AI in terms of being able to identify those grants. Talking about AI. Now, AI and smart search can also be used as a tool for going for money. Modern AI grant matching tools apply predictive analysis to surface high alignment opportunities from thousands of funders. Now you got to double check AI as with anything else like that. But if you combine AI with your core platform, you're in a better position. Okay, now there's also specialized databases that you can go to in order to gather to get money. And some of those are instrument. Grant Station. I use Grant Station a lot. Grant Forward, and these other types of places where you can go to actually identify where grants are. Contrary to popularly believed, you can't use Google because most of these organizations hide themselves. So you have to go through the gatekeepers in order to find out who they are. Okay, now you've identified who the funders are. You want to go for the money. This is the first step of putting together a proposal, and that is drafting the problem statement. Well, what's the purpose of a problem statement? Well, it defines the need behind the proposal, and the condition your organization aims to change. This is very important. Establishing why action is urgent and who is affected by it. So, what are the key requirements if you're going to go for a statement of the problem? We talked earlier about MEI. Well, here's another example. Those requirements require that you frame your problem statement around evidence-based and data supported information. You are looking at informed information by experts with insight and lived experience. You want to be able to describe the needs in human terms, relatable terms. You want to demonstrate a clear gap between current and the desired state. You want to be able to show this is the way it is, and this is the way it could be if we're funded. So once you've been able to identify the statement of the problem, now you have to provide the research necessary. Remember we talked about, and let me go back 1 second, we talked about evidence-based and data supported. Well, when we talk about that, we're talking about what are the research methodologies that you're going to use. This is primary T. First is quantitative research. Well, quantitative research focuses on words, experience, and the why behind behavior. Secondly, the methods. That is, they use interviews, focus groups, narrative analysts, and then finally, best for using this particular type of research when you want to understand the community contact, undercover burials, and build empathy-driven proposals. It's so important that you do that quantitative. Quantitative research is what's known as subjective research. It goes to the source itself to see what the problem is. And then the next type of research is called quantitative research, much more larger pool of people. It's focused on numbers, measurable data, and how much or how often. The methods will use surveys, statistical analysis, demographic data. Now, this is best for demonstrating scale, providing need with census tract, and satisfying funders matrix. Now, that being said, let's talk about the program that you want the money for. Because if there isn't a program, no matter how well you define the problem, there is no money. And if this cannot be a program, it's got to be a winner program. A strong program design is the engine of every fundable proposal. It proves you know how to create change. Let's talk about the 5 categories that you want to focus on when you're doing a program design. First is your theory of change. By your theory of change, I mean you should be able to articulate the causal chain. That is, if we do X, then Y will happen. Connect your activities directly to the community problem. Second, the target population. Define who you serve with precision. demographics, geography, burial, face, and how they were identified. Next, an interview. Describe each activity in detail. What happens, who delivers it, how often, and what evidence support this approach. Next, staffing and timeline. So show qualified staff data, show qualified staff, clear roles, and a realistic projected timeline with milestones tied to deliverables. And finally, community engagement. I cannot talk about how important this is. Document how residents shape this design. Cultural relevancy and community voice are not negotiable when it comes to your fundraisers. The key principle, program you must be able to reduplicate it, they must be measurable, and they must be rooted in evidence, not just intention. So, that being the case, you got a good program, you're ready to rock and roll. Now you have to show what success look like. How can you prove what you're doing, and how do you plan to do what you do? And this is called an evaluation framework. It demonstrates whether programs act, achieve intended outcome and is supported by funders' accountability. Let's talk about the actually five different parts of an evaluation framework. First is input. What staff do you need? How much do you need? What materials do you need? And how much time do you need in order to do what you do? Next, activities, services delivered, and programs that you're going to run. Next is outputs, people, people served and sessions heard. I mean, hell, if you do classes, you have to be able to document that. Outcomes, for example, behavioral and condition changes. What changes can result about as a result of your of your activities? And then finally, impact. What's the long-term community transformation that comes about as a result of the services that you provide? You have to show that it's more than immediate, but it also has a long-term impact. Now, we talked earlier about the different stages of a nonprofit. And the final stage of a nonprofit, definitely, or stage three, is when you begin to put together your 5-year strategic plan. Sorry about that, folks. 5 year strategic plan. Well, let's talk about the four parts of that. First is the environmental scaling. That is, you need to do a community need assessment, a SWOT analogy, and external trends monitoring to support strategy and reality. You need to look at the priorities. That means 3 to 5 year term goals with clear strategic objectives that guide the organization decision over the next 5 years. Operations. You need to do what's known as SMART objective staffing system, KPI, that translates strategies into executable day-to-day plans. And then governance. You need to be able to make sure that you have a good risk mitigation protocol. Okay, again, we go back to the final stage of a nonprofit, stage three, when you are talking about doing a nonprofit analyst. And there are three parts of that nonprofit analyst related to the SWOT. We talked SWOT earlier, just in passing. The first part, and these are two internal parts of the SWOT analogy. The SWOT analogy is very, very important because it goes to show where your organization is and where it needs to be. And it does so in four different ways. First, it looks at the strengths and the weakness. In that respect, it looks at the internal operation of your organization. When we talk about strength, we're talking about internal areas where you excel or hold unique resources and capability. Weaknesses, we're talking about areas needing improvement or where resources, skills, or systems are limited. You need to be very clear about this. That's why when we come in, we actually do a real SWOT analogy. And then after you do that, after you look at the inside, now you have to look at the outside, external things that are going on related to your organization. And we do this by looking at opportunities and threats. So what do we mean by opportunity? We mean positive external openings, trends, or partnership you can leverage strategically. And then what about the threats? These are external conditions, competitions, or policy changes that may hinder your progress. Now, bottom line, if you think that you're going to survive only on grants, the moment we talked about earlier, all those organizations that close that door, guess what? You're going to be part of it, continue to be part of that group. And in 2026, you don't want to be part of that group because there's going to be even more cuts that's coming down the pipeline this year in 2026. So how do you change that narrative? And what a nonprofit that is surviving, what are they using? Well, they're using a social entrepreneurship plan. Let's break down the three categories. First, let's talk about the definition. Generating sustainable earned income while pursuing your core social impact mission. Business model meets community need. Next, independence. Revenue support mission-driven activities and reduces dangerous reliance on any single funding source or grantor. And then finally, optimal model blends charitable contributions, earned income streams, and public subsidies for a maximum reliance. The budget. Now we got all that done. We know what the program is going to look like. We know how to evaluate the program. How much is it going to cost? And that's where you articulate that in your budget. Well, there are two types of costs associated with the budget. One is direct costs, and the other is called indirect costs. But what do we mean by direct costs? We mean salaries and wages, consulting and contractors, equipment and supply, program specific expenses. Indirect, we mean operational overhead, accounting and administration, facilities, and utilities. Now, it's calculated as a negotiable percentages. So we talked earlier about AI. And let's talk about what AI can do with an understanding that AI, when it comes to nonprofit, should only be used as a tool, but not the only thing. And we talk about the tools that you have to have in place. But one of the good things about AI is when it comes to fundraising. They use predictive analytics to identify donors' patterns and high likelihood given behavior. So it's good as matching. The other thing is communication. It can drive personalized donor messages to increase engagement and retention. The other thing is task automation. It automates data entry, scheduling, and volunteer coordination workflow. All of this AI does in terms of your organization. Data insight. It analyzes program data for trends, forecasting, and impact measurement. This is very important when you be able when we talk later on about data and the importance of data. The other thing it does is to it has what's known as content generation. And that it AI assisted grant writing, reports, and media marketing content. That's what AI can do. And then finally, program delivery. Unlike the humans, they have to go home at some point. With AI, it is available 24/7 to meet that client's need in real time. Now, all that's good. You've gotten the problem out the way, you got a good budget, uh, you know how to evaluate, you know what the problem is. Now the organization itself is going to be also looked into. And one of the ways that you want to make sure you're on the one is to make sure you got board development in place, best practices. And what do we mean by that? Well, you should have diverse expertise. Recruit members from various skills, legal, financing, marketing, and strong communication connection. Next, clear the roles. Clear roles. Define expectation, term, limits, and responsibility to inform board governance policy. Next, regular training. We provide board training as well. We did a holistic approach in our training. But let's get back to the business at hand. It board training provide ongoing education on nonprofit law, fiduciary duties, and strategic planning. That's what funders look for. They're saying what part is the board of director taking and governing the organization. And then finally, active engagement. Foster participation through committee work, fundraising, leadership, and advocacy efforts. Now, let's talk about effective fundraising strategies. So you got your donor corporations, and by that we mean that build lasting relationships through personalized communication, meaningful stewardship, and recognition programs related to your donors. Next, multi-channel appeal. Reach more donors through coordinated email, social media events, and direct mail campaigns. Monthly giving program. Establish recurring donor programs to generate stable, predictable revenue for sustainable operation. And then finally, grant diversification. Apply to multiple grant sources, federal, foundation, corporate, to reduce single grant dependency. Volunteers. Believe it or not, value funders do value our volunteers because volunteers do the work for free. So the funder show funders that somebody is buying into your organization. So let's talk about volunteer management essentials. First, recruitment. You can use social media, community events, and volunteer platforms to attract diverse talent aligned with your mission. Next, you want to provide a structure orientation, role specific training, and clear expectations from day one of engagement. And finally, recognition. You want to celebrate contributions through awards, public recognition, appreciation events, and personalized thanks. Risk management is another thing that funders look for. They don't want to put money in an organization that might be risky. And what do we mean by that? First, you should have financial control. You should implement a dual signature on check, conduct regular audits, and enforce segregation of financial duties. Legal compliance, maintain appropriate insurance, maintain appropriate insurance, complete annual filing, and adhere to all employees' requirements. And then crisis planning. Develop contingency plan for funding loss, legal trans, legal crisis management. Develop contingency plans for funding loss, leadership transition, and organization emergency before they occur. This is important. Risk management, very important. Community engagement. You have to engage the community. What funders look for is how are you in terms of community engagement? Let's talk about the four categories. First is need assessment. Conduct surveys, focus groups, and interviews to understand true community priorities. Partnership. Collaborate with local organizations, schools, and businesses for broader community impact. Inclusive planning. Ensure diverse voices, especially historically marginalized groups, actively shape program design. And then finally, feedback loops. Create ongoing channels for community input and the continuous program improvement. Now, let's get to this. You got everything together. We got the program together. We know what the problem is. We can evaluate it. We got all these things out there. But how people are going to know who you are? This becomes again, when you begin with that third stage of development of a nonprofit, how do you market and how do you communicate? Well, digital strategy, website optimization and SEO, social media presence and scheduling, email campaign, newsletter, content marketing and blogging, content marketing and blogging. When we talk about branding your organization, brand development, be consistent with your message and tone. Visual identity and style guides. Storytelling and constituents impact. Storytelling is so very, very important. Be good at telling the story. And then that annual impact report. Okay, now let's talk about financial sustainability models. Let's talk about the three different types of models. First is earned income. We talked about that earlier. And I'm gonna keep on emphasizing earned income because if you only dependent upon grants, quite candidly, you're gonna be one of those nonprofits that cease to exist in 2026. So earned income, we mean fee for services program, social enterprise ventures, and consultant engagement generate unrestricted revenues. That's how you get unrestricted revenues to earn income. Endowment building, long-term investment funds provide stable annual distribution, insulating operation from fundraising cycle. So definitely engagement building. And finally, plan giving, bequests, charitable trusts, and legacy donation programs build wealth for the organization's long-term future. We, in our in-depth class, do all of this. And then we talked earlier about the MEI and that data specific, evidence based. How do we do that? Well, how do we manage impact? Well, how do we manage data management and impact measurement? First, let's talk about data collection. How do we collect data? Well, we can collect data from client intake forms, program participation, tracking outline, participation tracking, online surveys, and follow-up. Analytical tools. What analytical tools can we use? We can use the CRM systems and database. We can use data visualization, dashboard, and we can use impact measurement platform. And then finally, reporting. funder progress report, annual impact statement, and community updates again, and storytelling. Partnerships is also a critical component in terms of what funders are look for. And there's three types of partnership that three key to our partnership. First is strategic alliance. Identify organizations with complementary missions and generally shared values, not just overlapping geography. Two, memorandum of understanding. Make sure you make sure you formalize any deal that you do. And then collective impact. Join collaborations and network, working towards common community goals for outsized submissive, outsized systemic change. And next, and finally, advocacy and public policy. And four areas that we're talking about: policy research, understand current legislation affecting your mission, grassroots mobilization, engage community membership, coalition building, partner with aligned organizations, and finally, direct engagement. Meet with elected officials, testify in public hearing, and participate in policy procedures. That we made it. I want to thank everybody for attending a nice class. Um, and I hope this has been some help to you in terms of your uh, efforts to bring your nonprofit. Know that we provide holistic services and affordable services in all different areas. For the next class, I want to talk about our grant development program, our holistic approach. It's a 10-lesson training program on how to go after dollars, how to write proposals, and how to go after dollars. I think you should know that grant writers can average anywhere from $50 on up an hour to write a particular grant. So you definitely want to use this as a source to either supplement your income, or you want to use this as a way to increase your chances of getting grant in your organization. Because the one thing you want to be able to do with your organization is that when it comes to grants, to be able to tell grant writers that we have grant writers who are part of our organization. So this training could be invaluable. The training that we provide is definitely affordable, but not even if that is affordable, but we also do installment plans as well. So now you have it. Things are moving along and things are not the same, but you can make that change. This class, I hope, has provided you with the tools necessary to do that. Now, in addition to the information below, you also can reach us at Center for Nonprofit and Community at gmail.com. That's Center for Nonprofit and Community at gmail.com.